Hey, Nathan here. Welcome back to another DirectX tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to discuss drawing sprites. Now, last tutorial, we just created the window and initialized Direct3D to work with the window. And we knew that worked by having a kind of a turquoise greenish background being displayed. And that was the DirectX actually displaying that. So in this video, we're going to extend on the last tutorial. This is the exact same code. The only thing I changed was the class name and the title of the window. Alright, so let's go ahead and make two new files. We're going to create a class for our sprites. So right-click the header files, go to Add, New Item, and it's going to be a header file, and we're going to call this GameSprite. And right-click Source Files and go to Add, New Item, and it's going to be a C++ file, and we're going to call this GameSprite. Alright, so let's open up the header file first, and let's start coding that. Alright, so the header file, that will, just like in the graphics device, that's where we set up all of our functions and pointers and properties, anything else we need, include any headers we need, and do the include guards. So in the GameSprite, let's go ahead and do that. So pound if ndef GameSprite _h pound define GameSprite _h pound end if. Alright, so for now, let's go ahead and start the class. So we do need an include file. We need to include D3DX9. We need to include the X version of the D3D9. So make sure, if we go to View here, and then let's go to Other Windows and Property Manager, and let's expand this, expand Debug, and double-click the CPP 132 user. And let's make sure that our linker input has d3dx9.lib. Alright, it's in there, so now we can close this. Alright, so let's include d3dx9.h. Alright, so we include that. Now we also need to include string, because we need to manipulate some strings and display some errors if any occurred. Okay, so now let's generate the class GameSprite. Let's start up the public section first. So, of course, constructor and destructor. So our constructor will just be GameSprite. And we're also going to have one more constructor, GameSprite. It's going to be float x, float y. So we can set up the x and y position of our sprite. And the destructor, GameSprite. Alright, so we're done with those. Now we need to generate our sprite functions. So our sprite functions will be bool, initialize, opening parentheses. We need to pass it the pointer to the device, which is LP Direct 3D Device 9. Let's pass it a std string, the file name, the int width of our texture, and int height of our texture. So the file name will be a string. Bool is initialized. So we need to have a boolean to determine if our sprite has been initialized or not. Virtual, if we ever want to override. Virtual, if we ever want to override. Void update. Let's just pass it float game time. And virtual void draw. Float game time. Alright, so that's it for the public section. Now let's work on the private pointers and attributes. Okay. So a sprite in DirectX needs to have a pointer to a texture and a pointer to the DirectX sprite. So we need to combine those into the single GameSprite class. So LP direct 3D texture 9. I'm going to just call it text. And then the sprite is LP D3 DX Sprite. I'm just going to call this Sprite. Alright, attributes now. D3D vector 3 position. Oh, I'm sorry, D3DX vector 3. Alright, and now D3D color. And then bool initialized. Alright, so let's go ahead and save that and go to the CPP file. So the CPP file is where our implementation is going to be. And let's go ahead and code that. We'll need to include the header file. GameSprite.h. Alright, so now the constructor. GameSprite, : GameSprite. The first constructor. Alright, so now we're going to default the sprite to position 0, 0, 0. Alright, so position.x is equal to 0. Position.y is equal to 0. And position.z is equal to 0. Alright. When color is set to white, what you see is exactly what the image looks like. So if you look at an image in an image editor, you know what you want the image to look like that in the game. So you set the color of our texture of our sprite to white, and that will draw exactly what you see in an image editor on the game. I know it's a bit confusing. You think you set color to white, it's going to make your image white. But it's the same thing with X and A. So color is equal to D3D color underscore ARGB. We're going to pass it an alpha value too, but it's all going to be 255. 255, 255, 255, 255. So it's white and 100% visible. We are not initialized yet, so we set initialize to false. Alright, now the second constructor, which we just do, we set up the X and Y, and then we set up all this as well. So, GameSprite, : GameSprite, excuse me, float X, float Y, set the position to X, Y, and default Z to 0. Position.x is equal to X. Position.y is equal to Y. And position.z is equal to 0. Alright, now let's go ahead and copy this color and is initialized here. Alright, so those are the constructors. Now let's initialize our sprite. So bool GameSprite initialize, opening parentheses. We need to pass the pointer to our device, the string of our file, an integer width, and an integer height. So we pass the pointer to our device, LP direct 3D device 9 device, a string for the file name, so std : string, the integer width and integer height of our image. Alright, opening and closing parentheses. Now we're going to use an extended function here. This function is going to have the same functionality as D3DX create texture from file, except width and height are manually entered. So we do this to actually set the width and height of our image and let DirectX know what our width and height are. Otherwise you'll get some weird scaling effect where it has to be the power of 2. But we can manually set the width and height by using this function here. So we're going to wrap all this up to an if succeeded call, and if it succeeded, then we can generate the sprite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it into an if not succeeded. If it has not succeeded, we'll display an error message and return false. If not, which is exclamation point, succeeded, which is all caps, opening parentheses, D3DX create texture from file EX, opening parentheses. We need the device, we need the file, we need the C string. So to get the C string from a string, you call file.c_str, opening closing parentheses, width, height, D3DX underscore default 0, D3DFMT underscore unknown, and let's go to a new line, D3D pool underscore managed, D3DX underscore default, D3DX underscore default 0, null, null, and our ampersand text and our texture. Alright, 3 closing parentheses, opening closing curly brackets. So you can call create texture from file, and you can just pass in the device file and I think a couple more things. But this is the exact same thing as the create texture from file. All these default and unknown and managed, those are all the standard stuff it provides when you just call this standard function. So I just made this create texture from file EX function work exactly like create texture from file, except we pass in the width and the height. Alright, so the first thing it needs is the device, of course, because it needs to work with the device in order to create the texture. The file name, of course, so you know where to get the file, where to get the image. And then the width and the height in order to appropriately set the size of our texture. Now this D3DX.default underscore default, that is the MIP levels. That's the default value for the MIP levels. The next up is usage, which is 0. And then the format, that's just to identify how the format of our texture, requested pixel format. And then the pool, how is it managed or unmanaged, or how, describing the memory, how it works on that. The next up is filter, and we're just putting those as default. So the filter and MIP filter are default. The color key is 0. That is to replace the transparent black, or 0 to disable the key. So we're just using 0 to disable the key. Color key is 0. Source info is null. We don't have any information to pass here. Palette is null. Don't want anything passed in there. And our pointer to our texture. So that is what makes up this function here. That's exactly the same as D3DX CreateExtra from File, except the width and height are manually entered. Alright, so if it did not succeed, std string s is equal to double quote, there was an issue creating the texture. Make sure the requested image is available. Requested image was colon space end quote plus file. Alright, message box, opening parentheses, null, comma, s.c underscore str, opening closing parentheses, comma, null, comma, null. So it just tells you what happened, and most likely the cause was the requested image could not be found. Alright, so if that did succeed, oh, one more thing. After we display the message box, we need to return false. Okay, if that did succeed, we need to actually create the sprite now. So we attempt to create the sprite. If not succeeded, opening parentheses, D3DX create sprite, opening parentheses, device ampersand sprite. 3 closing parentheses, opening closing curly brackets. Now if that did not succeed, we want to display another pop-up window. So message box, opening parentheses, null, comma, there was an issue creating the sprite. Null, null. Return false. Alright, so that just tells us to investigate this part of the code and find out what's going on here. Alright, so we attempt to create the device. If that fails, we return false. If it succeeded, we set initialize is equal to true and return true. Alright, so that is the initialize function. Now we just have a few more things to do. So the next function is called isInitialize. So bool GameSprite is initialized. Return initialized. So that's all we need to do. We need to return initialized. We don't want to give public access to this attribute, so we have an isInitialize function to do that for us. Alright, now update and draw. And then the last thing is the destructor. So void GameSprite colon update float game time. We do not have anything here, so update logic here. Void GameSprite draw float game time. Alright, so draw, we need to draw if the sprite and the texture exist. So if sprite and text, if those two, if the pointers exist, if the pointers are not 0, sprite begin. D3DX sprite underscore alpha blend. That way we can, that way it works with transparent pixels. Alright, so sprite begin. We need to begin and end on the sprite as well as begin and end on the device. Sprite draw. Let me move this up here. So sprite draw, we need to draw text, draw the texture. The source rectangle is null. We want to draw the entire texture. The center of our texture is null. The center will be at the top left of the texture. The position will be ampersand position. And then the color will be color. Sprite end. So that's all we need to do to draw our sprite. Last up is the destructor. GameSprite, : tilde GameSprite. Oh. Tilde GameSprite. That's the constructor. If sprite release and sprite is equal to 0. If text release text is equal to 0. Alright, so we just need to release our DirectX resources when we're done with it and make sure the pointer is set to 0, set to null. Alright, so that's it for the header and CPP file. Let's build and see if we have any errors. It succeeded, so we're good. Let's head on over to the main file where we will actually be using these sprites. Alright, so in the include area at the top, let's include GameSprite.h, and in the right after our update and draw function declare prototype area, let's set up global player sprites. So GameSprite, let's set up a pointer and let's call it player semicolon. Alright, so right now we'll just have to deal with global sprites here. When we get into a later tutorial, it might be the next tutorial, we're going to wrap all this into a game engine. And that way it'll be a class, and we'll leave all the WinMain and the WinProc in this main file. But the game engine will take over, and it'll be just like X and A, basically. It'll be a class, we can have properties, methods in there, and everything else. It'll look a lot cleaner than having global stuff everywhere. Alright, so we have a global sprite, and in the WinMain, where we set up our graphics device, after that has been initialized, player is equal to new game sprite. Now I'm just going to pass it, I'm going to use the X and Y here, 100, 200. Alright, player, arrow, we need to initialize it, so we need to pass it a pointer to our device, which is G device, arrow, device, comma, the name of our image, which I'll give you guys access to my image here. Let me open up my computer area. So the image I'm going to give you access to is one of my space shooter images. So that will be in the description. It'll be a dedicated image file, so you do not need to download a zip or anything like that. So the image will be this guy. And again, if you look at this in an image viewer, you see this green and blue. Remember I mentioned earlier in the video where if you set the color to white, what you see in an image editor is what you will see in the game. So even though we're setting the color of our texture to white, this is what we'll see in the game. So I'll give you this file. You can use it however you want. I don't have any usage restrictions on how you use it. And I'll show you how to use it in our code here. Alright, so the name of this file is called Player Paper, and it's a PNG file. So it's playerpaper.png. And now you look at an image editor or in Windows, you can just click on it. If you're on Windows 7 or Windows 8, you can click on it, make sure the details little view area here, details here, and make sure that you see this thing and you can see the width and the height, 5886. So we need to pass that into our function 58,86. Alright, so that will initialize our sprite, and if we have any errors, we'll get a message box, and we will get a message box when I run this. So just be prepared for that. Alright, so let's update and draw. We have that. And once we're done, we need to delete player. Alright, so nothing has changed in our generate window functions. Nothing has changed in window proc or update. We do not update at this time. But we do have something to draw now. So if player and, oops, I'm in the comment here. So if player and player arrow is initialized, player arrow draw. So we draw by passing in the game time. And that's all we need to do. Alright, so let's save it. Let's build it. See if there's any errors. There has been no errors. And we run it, but we have an error. There's an issue created in the texture. Make sure the requested image is available. Requested image is player paper. Alright, so if you click OK, we can quit the game if you wrap this up into a you can wrap this up here if initialize here. We can wrap that up there. And then if we do this, we build it and run it again. Now if we click OK, it'll quit the whole game. Alright, so we do have our sprite. We do have it here, and if you want to get that sprite, you can download it. Make sure you look at the description. It'll just be a PNG file that you can download. Now we need to get this sprite into where our game is running. So let's go ahead and build solution, and let's bring up this output window. And then just build again. All right. Let's rebuild here. Alright, so we rebuilt it, and it tells it where it is. So it's going into drawing sprites. It's going in this file here. So copy everything except for the file name .exe. So just copy it to the last folder location. And then go to that folder. So we're in the debug folder here. We have our exe, we have our linker, and our debug database. Now let's go ahead and copy our image file to here. Now if we run our game, it still gave us an error message. Now why would you think that? Well, if we go up one directory, we have our debug here, that's where we have our player paper. Now if we run it from here, hey, it works fine. But if we run it from Visual Studio, it still gives us an error message. So what you want to do is go up one directory, and then go into this Drawing Sprites folder, and then copy the image there as well. Now if we press F5, now we have our image. Alright, so now to verify that our sprite is being presented with alpha blending, let's create another player. GameSprite player 2. Let's just call it player 2. So if player initialize and player 2, we need to call new here. Player 2 is equal to new GameSprite. And let's say the X and Y, we need to make this one 80, 200. Alright, so if player initialize and player 2 initialize, so we just need to initialize it with the same thing. So if player 1 initialize and player 2 initialize, then we do this logic here, and then we need to delete player 2. Now in our draw, we need to do the same thing. If player 2 and player 2 is initialized, player 2 draw game time. So if we press F5, we have not encountered any errors, and our alpha blending does work because we can see the bottom texture in this area here. Alright, so that is how you draw sprites in the DirectX world. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned some useful things. Now there's one thing I'm not sure about, and I did some research when I was first getting ready about several months ago, on how to load the PNG files in here and not build them. It's a PNG file, I don't want to build it as a bitmap. When I edited it here, it defaulted it to the build action as bitmap. I did not see a PNG option here. So if you want to use bitmap or TGA files, I'm sure you can add it to Visual Studio and have that work for you. But I prefer PNG files, so I have to deal with the extra frustration of copying it to the directory manually, I guess. Now, if anybody has any ideas, you're welcome to provide a comment in the description. Keep in mind, I like to use PNG files, not TGA or bitmap. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. I guess next time we will create the game engine itself and clean up this main function here, the win main, and the main.cpp file as well. So I hope to see you next time.